From the European Parliament here in Brussels, this is Raw Politics. Thank you for joining us tonight, and this is what we have for you on the menu. Brexit bonanza, doomsday warnings, new campaigns, last-minute meetings. Well, we round it all up and ask for the inside scoop from EU coordinator Guy Verhofstadt. After Aquarius, what life is like now for the men and women stranded for 10 days aboard the rescue ship. Special friends, the politics behind Putin's back-to-back meetings with Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Viktor Orban. Plus, brand Macron, the sales figures are in for everything Emmanuel. Welcome to Raw Politics. Now, amid dire quotes like darkest hour and talk of a turning point, the stakes are certainly set for a gathering of European leaders tomorrow. And at the top of their agenda, it's Brexit. And today, the preparations are in full swing. Chief EU Brexit negotiator Michel Barnier, he's briefing ministers on the state of negotiations tonight. Well, our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, has been working on this story today. Darren, tell us what you've been working on.
Well, as you say, Tessa, we are coming into the final stages, the final lap, as the European Union put it today, of these Brexit negotiations. And we're getting to the crucial stage where I think people are going to have to compromise. And that means compromise from the British side, but also from the European Union side too. We also learned today that there is almost certainly now going to be a final, we think, Brexit summit in November, where there is hope that a deal can be done. But can one be done? Well, I spoke, as you said, to Guy Verhofstadt, the Brexit coordinator for the European Parliament, a little earlier on. Let's have a look at the interview. First of all, I want to start with Brexit, probably unsurprisingly. We heard today from an advisory group in the UK that preferences for EU nationals should come to an end after Brexit. The British government said they'll look at it. The Labour Party have welcomed it. It's what people seemingly voted for. I assume in that case, the European Union would then end its preference for British people.
I don't think it's a good start for negotiations already to be on such a position. I think that we need the closest partnership as possible between the EU and UK after the withdrawal, and that means also a good system for UK nationals living on the continent and for EU nationals living in Britain. So that will be part of the future relationship, and it's far too early to say already how it will work. But it will be part of the discussions and the negotiations on the future relationship.
But if Britain does end its preference for EU workers, Europe will have to do the same for British workers.
Yeah, but I don't think that will be the outcome of this whole negotiation. So first of all, we need to conclude the withdrawal agreement, we need to fix finally the transition period, and we need to have a clear view on the future relationship. And let's be honest, that's the problem for the moment. We are stuck in these negotiations, and we think that a close relationship is possible, and in such a close relationship there will be a special treatment in any way for UK nationals living on the continent, EU nationals living in Britain. So the assumption that you're making is that there is no deal or there is no good outcome of these negotiations. And I'm an optimist by nature, so I still believe that it is possible to have a positive outcome of these negotiations.
Talking about the deal and the future relationship and the withdrawal agreement, Theresa May has said it is, for her politically, checkers or nothing. Do you think EU leaders will accept checkers?
Well, no, checkers is positive in a number of areas. Let's first say that. It's, for example, positive that checkers is proposing an association agreement. That's the position of the European Parliament, that an association agreement is the best basis to establish this new relationship. Secondly, it's positive on external security, it's positive on the cooperation on internal security, it's positive on a number of thematic cooperations. The problem with checkers for the European Union is in the economic and trade part, where checkers is proposing a facilitated customs arrangement with two different tariffs and with and where we should outsource our custom duties, and that will never happen. The European Union is a full-fledged customs union, and we cannot accept differentiation in tariffs, or we cannot accept to outsource our duties.
So it makes it sound that
That's one. I have still a second. If you want to know more about that, the second is the common rule book. Common rule book means that in fact when we make rules on services, on special activities, on an import and export of goods, we can do that as a single market. We do that now as a single market with 28. In the future, we do that with 27, and then have a separate negotiation on this with Britain, and that is not possible.
But isn't the political reality though? Theresa May has said it has to be this or nothing. You're saying, and the EU seem to be saying, we cannot accept checkers.
We cannot accept these two concepts that are in checkers.
Who compromises? You're going to have to compromise. Theresa May says, like, this is it. This is my deal. I cannot move on this. Politically, in Britain, she's in a corner. You're going to have to compromise.
Well, it's always possible to make compromises, and I think I live in Belgium. That's a country that knows very well the art of compromising. But what we will not do is to compromise in a way that we destroy the single market or the European Union. That we will not do. We cannot, for example, compromise in saying, okay, yeah, the customs union doesn't exist anymore in the European Union, and we're going to make a facilitated customs arrangement with different tariffs and outsourcing or customs duties. That is not possible. So even when I want to compromise, it is impossible to compromise on such a thing. But I think it is possible, nevertheless, to find a way out on this.
By November?
By November, yeah, it's possible to find a way out and to see how we can secure the principles of the European Union and also respect the red lines of the UK government. But it will be a little bit different than these two concepts that are in the Chequers plan, I think.
You've been involved in this process for, what, 18 months, 2 years now. Yeah. Do you talk to Theresa May much?
Yeah, I was there before the summer break, and I will be there next week.
What's she like to deal with?
No, I have a very good impression of my first meeting with her, and I hope next week my second meeting will be as constructive to find a way out. And so one of the results of this first meeting was also the common understanding that an association agreement is the way forward for the future relationship. So that is positive. Also, what was positive in my first meeting, so these meetings are not are useful, was that for the EU citizens currently living in Britain, that nothing should change, and there was some doubt about this at a certain moment. And after my meeting with Theresa May, the conclusion was no, EU citizens will simply continue to have the same rights and benefits as today.
Are you glad you're dealing with Theresa May rather than someone like Boris Johnson?
Well, I think that a number of leading people in the Conservative Party are very much aware of the fact that a hard Brexit will be devastating, not only for the European Union, but far more for Britain. And these people, I listen to these people, and one of these people is certainly the Prime Minister, Theresa May. She knows very well that this is not an option. And so we are working towards a deal, an agreement, but it has to be an agreement that doesn't destroy the principles and the system of the European Union. Certainly not, because since Brexit, what we have seen on the continent is a growing support from different public opinions in favor of the European Union, in favor of the single market, in favor of our single currency. And why this is? Because people are seeing what is happening in Britain. They say, okay, I'm also very critical towards the European Union, but I'm not so stupid to leave the Union or to
So
try to break
Brexit's
it.
been good for the EU?
Well, in a certain way, it helps now people to understand what the benefits are from the European Union. And that is more clear for a lot of people since Brexit, yeah.
And just very finally, on a completely different topic, En Marche and this apparent alliance. What happened? It seemed to be on last week. Is it still on? Are you going to
we are simply working on it, and a new movement around the call of Emmanuel Macron to reform Europe, as an alternative for nationalists and populists, based on his very important speech that he has given last year before the Sorbonne in Paris. That is what Europe desperately needs, and my group, the ALDE, is ready to cooperate.
So we're going to see a deal, do you reckon? An alliance?
No, you don't call it an alliance. There are already alliances enough. A new movement, a reformist movement, as an alternative for nationalists and populists. That is what we need.
Well, I'm going to bring our other panelists now. Jennifer Baker, she's a freelance reporter writing about EU tech policy and legislation, and also contributor with Euractiv.com. And Quentin Ariès, a French journalist covering Brexit for the Washington Post. Quentin, I'll start with you. You cover Brexit. Who is going to blink first? I mean, every corner there seems to be an impasse. You know, they can't move forward. So who's going to blink first?
Well, I guess on Thursday, when leaders are going to meet in Salzburg, the tone will be more blinking to some extent. Afterwards, we will need to see the content, and we will need to see on whether or not EU leaders are going to update Barnier's mandate, or maybe to shift Barnier's mandate toward a more compromising attitude. But so yes, maybe Europeans will make a sign this week, but we still don't know.
And Darren, when you were doing that interview, did you get the feeling that there was room for maneuver from the EU side? Because like freedom of movement, that's something that's a non-negotiable when they talk about it. And he's optimistic, he says. But do you think there's room for manoeuvre? I
think there is room for manoeuvre, and I think we have seen in the last couple of weeks a change, at least, of the mood music around Brexit. There are clearly one big stumbling block when it comes to trying to get this withdrawal agreement, the exit essentially, in place by November, and that is on the issue of the Irish border. You talk to all these EU officials, and it's still clear that they are not there when it comes to an agreement about the backstop, the so-called backstop, that if there is no deal, that Northern Ireland essentially stays within the customs union to avoid a hard border. So there is still some work on that, but there is talk that 80 to 90% of the work there to reach an agreement is done. So I think we're getting there. And it's how much they then fudge what the future relationship looks like enough to get over that finishing line. So those negotiations in the transition period about what the relationship between the UK and the EU is going forward, well, they're going to be just as troublesome, just as difficult, just as awkward. But that's the next step after agreeing this.
Yeah, the Irish border, one of the biggest sticking points. Jennifer, you have a personal stake at this as well, because, you know, any background, but as a journalist covering it. So you're Irish. How do you analyse this with family on both sides of the border, actually?
Oh, well, I'm Irish. Well, my parents are Northern Irish, so I spent a lot of my childhood crossing over and back that border. And I mean, I have to say, it is a big issue, and I feel it's getting pushed to the side. We have the Irish Taoiseach in Brussels today, and the Foreign Affairs Minister as well, Simon Coveney. He's talking to Barnier about de-dramatising this so-called backstop issue. But what that really means is it means a technological border in the Irish Sea. And I don't know how you de-dramatise that to the point of making all political parties happy. So I do see it still as a big problem. I mean, and we focus very much on the issue of the border and goods and services going across it and people going across it. I have to say, as a child crossing that border, it was an inconvenience. There were queues for trucks, there were queues for cars. But that is not the big issue. The big issue is what happens to the Good Friday Agreement. And if there's an increase in sectarian violence in Northern Ireland, no one is going to thank politicians on any side. And I feel that's really regrettably being ignored.
And it's interesting, Tesa, on the issue of the Irish border, having said for the last 18 months or so, both Dublin and Brussels, that technology was not the solution. What we're now starting to see is, I think, an acceptance from Brussels that technology has to be the solution on the Irish border. And we're already starting to see compromise. After, 18 months of the EU forcing Britain into a corner, to force them to compromise after compromise, I think Europe is now finally starting to realise, with only a matter of weeks to go, that they need to move.
There are so many points in this, aren't there? We have, it's time for the Brexit brief, because there are a lot of points in this Brexit talks, negotiations that we have to touch on. And here are some of the developments today. Let's take a look. Facing unrelenting criticism and talk of an open revolt, British Prime Minister Theresa May is putting her foot down, saying it's the Chequers deal or nothing.
As I say, I believe we'll get a good deal. We'll bring that back from from the EU negotiations and put that to Parliament. I think that the alternative to that will be not having a deal.
Her comments come as we approach 6 months to Brexit, and May says the only alternative to her plan is to crash out of the EU with nothing. On that note, a new Brexit committee report says a no-deal outcome would be chaotic and damaging for the economy. It also says companies would face huge uncertainty. And they're not alone. A new report on immigration paints a similar picture for European citizens. The report says that free movement from the EU should end after Brexit, and there should be no preferential treatment for citizens of any other country. That's music to the ears of Brexiteers, who today launched a new media blitz. The nationwide advertising campaign labelled Chuck Checkers appears in 30 regional newspapers across Britain. And it also announced a series of rallies in a revamp of the Leave campaign. 6 months ago, that's not much time. Kanta, the IMF had issued a warning on what the economy would look like post-Brexit. 1.5% growth. Okay, the numbers aside, what is that looking like?
A no deal, like, would be a catastrophe to some extent. Like, just like this is why, like, all the reports that have been published by some pro-Leave groups or economist groups can be easily debunked, because, like, in terms of access, whatever, you can put some VAT and so on. The WTO is basically the bottom line. But Europe, and over the past 40 years, we have been trading on both sides of the channel, not on the bottom line, but more sophisticated products and so on and so forth. So, like, those kind of reports are kind of, I wouldn't say rubbish, but it's kind of, they are forgetting the fact also, like, all the regulatory issues, which are very important for the cost of any product.
I think you have to understand, though, the almost exacerbated sense there is amongst the British public, which is that, you know, they were told 2 years ago that essentially the sky would fall in if they voted for Brexit. Yeah. They did. It didn't happen. We've had a whole summer of potential scare stories, that's what Brexiteers would call them, about what will happen if there is no deal, that the sky will again fall in. And a lot of people just are not believing this. And actually, interestingly, there is a poll out today that suggests that 80% of people think the negotiations are not going very well, but most people still want to leave. They just want to get out and they'll deal with the consequences. And I think that what we're hearing from the IMF, what we're hearing from the British government and the Treasury and everyone else, how's that really going down with Joe Bloggs in Britain?
Exactly.
They're saying, you know what, let's just do it.
What about people here, Jennifer, here in Brussels or in the rest of Europe? You know, actually the question is quite simple. Will that mean I need my passport again going to the EU? Will that mean roaming is going to come up? You know, those questions that citizens would be asking.
Well, I mean, certainly with the passport saying, hey, the UK is not in the Schengen area anyway, so we kind of do need a passport already. The question regarding, you say, roaming charges, the telecoms companies have reassured their clients that we are not going to reintroduce roaming charges. But that's just, you know, we have to take their word for it. You know, they're not bound by any...
But we have to be realistic. You know, we also hear that, you know, the planes aren't going to fly. I mean, they will. And I think by slightly potentially over-egging it, which some people on the Remain side or some people who want to stop Brexit, essentially Britain, is that in essence they're undermining their own case. Because will it be the doomsday scenario? I don't know, almost certainly probably not. Will it be damaging? Of course it will. I think everyone accepts it will be damaging. Will it be, as Theresa May once put it, will the sky fall in? Probably not.
I mean, fairly sure the sky's not going to fall in. Do you ask me, genuinely asking me that?
But I say metaphorically.
You know, we go to Switzerland without problems.
If no deal, it means a lot of small deals. So, like, if you take aviation. But the thing right now is that the EU and the UK has a possibility in 5 months, 6 months to cover everything, like a big withdrawal agreement by small deals. Like, it's something like... What we learned over the past years of the negotiation is, like, the learning process in how to negotiate Brexit takes a long time, and politically it is very contentious. What's happening for the plane? If you have an issue with the plane, you make a small deal with the plane. It's the same thing with the food. And if, like, you have counter arguments, like, how do you negotiate? It's very challenging.
The only conclusion we can say is that this withdrawal deal will not be the last deal.
No, not at all.
The end of the negotiation.
All right, we will stay with the Brexit theme now, but we'll move on to farming for today's Eurostars, and it's about a row which has broken out between Farmers Weekly magazine and the UK government body DEFRA. Well, we see the two are fighting after DEFRA released the first edition of this video, showing lusciously green fields, blue skies and rolling hills. Well, the video was supposed to be a post-Brexit farming utopia. Well, the only problem was the farms weren't actually British, but German and Slovenian. Now, these images saved from that video show Slovenian cow shed and an aerial shot of a German farm. DEFRA blamed their PR agency and say the mistake will be corrected as soon as possible. Well, that is quite a blunder, isn't it? But I mean, is it telling of what Brexit may bring? Are you reading anything more into this?
I'm just thinking, you could have predicted this. This is definitely not the first to stumble headlong into this particular scenario. You just got to wonder about the PR company that thought that was a good idea and didn't triple check every single bit of footage.
Absolutely. But what with regard to a serious topic, agriculture, I mean, what are we looking at there?
Agriculture is important to Britain. It is still only 1 or 2% of the economy, so it's not crucial to Britain's economy. It's not the city of London, for example, but it is one of these passionate issues, like we see in France and indeed in Ireland. Farmers care, and they've got an awful lot of political clout. They will not be happy. They will not be happy farmers that European Union images are being used to portray their farmers. At the end of the day, someone messed up. And also, shouldn't the civil service be doing something better than some ridiculous PR campaign?
And what about disentangling?
No.
Disentangling of industries. Where is that, Kanta? I mean,
What you want me to say? But it's not the first time that it happens, because I think it happens already with Fox Department on trade. It happened several times. It's kind of a running gag, in UK.
My favourite is when you've got
PR campaigns.
Stock images of politicians that then get used in other images, like man eating or man injects himself, and it turns out that it's Ed Miliband or.
We will have a lot of Brexit talk this week. I think we'll be really going to be watching this topic. So we'll leave it at that for the moment. And for tonight on Raw Politics, there's another story that we are tracking. The fallout from a night out of the president of Venezuela. Well, the Cube team and Alex Morgan have been tracking this story. Alex?
Tesa, it all started with a video on social media. Let's bring it to you now. This is in a restaurant in Istanbul, and this man here, this is the celebrity chef known as Salt Bae for his the way he seasons his meat dishes. Runs a chain of steak restaurants across Turkey, hugely famous. But it's not just him all eyes are on in this video, it's his guest. And that guest was Venezuela's president, Maduro, here, enjoying this incredibly expensive meat, puffing on a cigar, even given a T-shirt with Salt Bae's image on it. Now, why is this controversial? Well, this is at a time when Venezuela is in a crippling hyperinflation and food crisis. Here is the president, videoed, a video later removed by Salt Bae, actually, eating this meat, enjoying this incredibly expensive steak at a celebrity chef's restaurant while his people are suffering. Now, earlier in the summer, Reuters news agency, they reported on just how extensive this problem was, showing you need literally piles and piles of bolivars, that's the currency in Venezuela, to afford basic items. They're saying here you need 14 million, nearly 15 million bolivars just to afford a chicken. Now, people there, a vast number now reporting that they're losing weight and that there's a food crisis with malnutrition an issue. So the political opponents of the president really seizing upon this as a sign that the president is completely out of touch with his people. Julio Borges here saying that the president is enjoying this steak with his wife while Venezuelans are starving. Now, that is the sense we're getting. Also, people turning this into a meme. Here we go, showing Venezuelans in this cartoon picking through the garbage looking for their food while Salt Bae is above it there, seasoning it in his traditional way. So a very, very controversial image, now deleted by Salt Bae, but the videos are still being shared around on social. Tessa.
All right, thank you for that, Alex and the Cube team. Well, we will come back to Europe in the rest of the program on Raw Politics. First, Erdogan, now Orban. Vladimir Putin's dance card is full this week. Plus, 3 months after they were stranded aboard the rescue ship Aquarius for 10 days, we catch up with some of the men and women who were at the center of a political storm.
Once again, there's a risk our lifeboat could be overturned. We're forced to back away from desperate, drowning people. The rescuers are doing their best to keep control of the situation. It's at that point that I learned there's a pregnant woman on the raft.
Welcome back to Raw Politics. That was a short excerpt from Euronews' documentary, 10 Days at Sea, the real story of the Aquarius. Our correspondent, Annelise Bourget, she was the only correspondent broadcast journalist on that ship. And it came to symbolize, really, the migrant crisis in Europe over that summer. And Annelise has been tracking and following the stories of some of the people she met on board. Annelise, good to see you there. So can you tell us, what's happened to some of those people you've made, connections with there, you've met?
Well, the ones I was able to track down, Tesa, have now applied for asylum in Spain, where the vast majority stay, but also here in France, where 78 people from the Aquarius were brought to. And after that very difficult journey that saw them leave their hometowns in African countries, cross Libya, and then take that dangerous crossing of the Mediterranean Sea, they were all very happy to get to Europe. Back in June, when we disembarked in Valencia, they spoke about big plans, about going back to school, getting a job, finding a house. They knew it was not going to be easy, but they were very hopeful about the future. Well, reality has since kicked in, and they have told me about how difficult it is to be presented with a whole new set of challenges in a different languages, a convoluted legal procedure. And some told me they are starting to wonder whether or not Europe will be able to deliver their dream of a prosperous and peaceful life.
These are, quite literally, the first few steps of Reward's brand new journey, or as he prefers to put it, his second chance in life.
You see that guy from there? That was when I stood for the first time when I saw this place. It came to my mind, the Aquarius, like, wow.
And do you think about Aquarius often?
That was a new beginning of a new life. When you think that hope is lost, there a new door is open. No one will forget something of that nature.
Reward Oko was the last person to disembark from the Aquarius 3 months ago, when the charity vessel found itself at the heart of a diplomatic crisis that threatened to split Europe apart. Aquarius spent days stuck at sea with 630 people on board after Italy decided to close its ports to refugees and migrants rescued in the Mediterranean. Malta said it wouldn't let the vessel dock either. The standoff ended when Spain agreed to provide a safe harbor to the men, women and children who had risked everything to get to Europe. After disembarking in Valencia, Reward was taken to Bilbao, where he applied for asylum. While authorities examine his case, which could take up to 3 years, he's been given accommodation and a small allowance so that he can feed and clothe himself. For now, his sole responsibility is to attend 3 hours of Spanish lesson per day. But Reward is eager to do more. Free time, he says, is his worst enemy.
Most of the time, sitting alone or sitting around the house, you might get bored, and sometimes some kind of flash memories can just come. Like,
what kind of memories?
One of my friends, actually. I lost him in the prison. He was arrested, but as time goes on, he died also within the prison premises.
In Libya?
Yeah, in Libya.
Those who arrived in Europe aboard Aquarius bore different scars. Some had fled conflict. Others were escaping from equally crippling poverty. Now they get to experience a new reality, one that won't necessarily correspond to their dreams.
You mentioned that your dream would be to become a pilot. Do you feel as though you're a little closer to your dream now that we're sitting here in Bilbao?
It's quite a beginning of the step, actually. It's a step because there can be more opportunity, more than in Africa, actually. Because for now, we have to make some savings. It's going to be a really, really long time. And it's going to take a time. It might happen, but I don't know.
So it might happen, but uncertainty really seems to be a feeling shared by many of the people I have met in Spain, these people who disembarked in Valencia on June 17th and are now trying to come to terms with the magnitude of the challenges ahead. They have yet to learn whether or not they can stay in Europe, and of course they have no idea what their European life will be like.
And at least the uncertainty is not just for the people that you met on board, it's also for the actual rescuers and the rescue ships. Because, you know, each time they come to the shores of Europe, there are questions of whether or not they can dock, or were they in the right or in the wrong. What is the fate of these ships and rescuers?
Well, Aquarius has exposed these unresolved tensions. He has really revealed these profound divisions and different experiences each one of the EU member states have been confronted with regards to the migrant crisis. Italy, or at least the Italian Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini, says Italy has already done too much and has seen very little help from the EU. It's time for the EU to do more, according to Matteo Salvini. And by closing Italian ports and handing over control of those search and rescue operations to Libyan authorities, Matteo Salvini has made the work of these charity groups virtually impossible. They say, these rescuers say, that they feel powerless and they feel that politics are being placed above people's lives. The UNHCR says the consequence has been a huge surge in the number of deaths in the Mediterranean Sea. And of course, NGOs and the UN alike are urging Europe to come up with a solution, a unified response that takes into consideration the overriding legal obligation placed on everyone, flag and coastal states, as well as all vessels, which is the duty to provide assistance to those in distress at sea.
All right, thank you for that, Annelise Borges, our correspondent. And with me to discuss this in more detail, we have our very own political editor, Darren McCaffrey, Jennifer Baker from BrusselsGeek.com, and a Washington Post contributor, Quentin Ariès. This week, we have the Salzburg summit coming, and migration is going to feature very prominently on that. Do you think policy, I'll put it to you, policy will change anything?
Well, I mean, policy has got to be one of the solutions.
Or will the policy change, rather?
Yeah,
actually?
I mean, based on Salzburg, probably not, but based on future summits going forward. What's really interesting, however, is the position of, it's happening in Salzburg because Austria is holding the presidency. The position of Kurz has changed a little bit there.
Right.
He seems to be softening, distancing himself a little bit more from Salvini and other sort of
basically, just to explain that he used to blame Brussels a lot, like Brussels. Now he's saying that the frontline countries have to step up and pull their weight as well.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, I mean, that could sort of be the turning point for how negotiations are going to go. I mean, you've also got to say there are political solutions out there that are being proposed, and countries aren't actually implementing them. The whole burden sharing has not really come to pass in the way it should have. And then you get into, you know, these tit for tat arguments in the Mediterranean Sea between Malta and Italy. And, you know, I think during this whole process, what we're losing sight of is, I mean, at least get people ashore. Human Rights Watch put out a report in the last day or so saying it was like 1,600 people have been killed and lost so far this year. I mean, you can redo political positions, you can redo paperwork. You can't breathe life back into someone at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea.
It said that the European Union very much still view the solution to these problems not being in Europe, but being at the place of origin. They are quite pleased and keep reiterating this point, Tesa, that's, 84%, I think, are the numbers done on the peak in terms of migrant levels compared to 2015. They're back at pre-2015 levels. Also, because of a deal, no one has travelled from Egypt in the past year. So they very much view the solution not being in Europe, but being at the point of origin.
Exactly. That's another point that has to be really discussed. But now, first, let's look at the lives of those Aquarius migrants that have changed. And so has the way, again, that the rescue ships in the Mediterranean operate. This is a very important point, as they are the crux of the matter. Alex Morgan and theCUBE has more on that side of the story. Alex?
Well, Tessa and team, you're hearing there about the Aquarius and the journey Annelise followed. Well, the Aquarius is now back, one of the only search and rescue ships back out there in the Mediterranean, saying they're increasing speed and heading towards the international waters off the coast of Libya to continue search and rescue operations. But Matteo Salvini very quickly tweeting afterwards to say they will not be welcome in Italian ports, and then tweeting this map underneath you can see here, showing a number of vessels. But look at these three here in Malta. 3 ships unable to leave Malta. Now, we've been following the story of these ships who effectively have been stuck there all summer after the Maltese authorities clamped down on them. We spoke to Ruben from Sea-Watch, one of those vessels, and this is what he had to say to us.
Our ship, the Sea-Watch 3, is still blocked in the port of
We're not getting the sound of
Malta,
Ruben there. Basically, he's saying the Maltese authorities are illegally detaining his vessel and calling on the Prime Minister of Malta and the Maltese authorities to let them leave. Now, political pressure is indeed increasing on the Maltese as 3 MEPs took part in a visit to see these ships unable to leave the ports. And they have now written a letter and signed it to the Prime Minister of Malta, Joseph Muscat, who we in the Cube have been trying to reach all summer, it's fair to say, for a comment on this, saying that you must now allow these ships to continue their search and rescue operations. So there is a very complicated situation. I want to finally just show you one of the things we reported last week, which was when the search and rescue clampdown happened in June, you can see there was a spike in the number of people who lost their lives in the Mediterranean. That's 451. So you can see a very politically charged issue and one still ongoing in Malta.
Right, thank you for that, Alex and the Cube team. Certainly a story we will be following here on Euronews. Now, there's a lot more coming after the break. 3 days, 350,000 euros, not bad, for the French president, whose face is adorning mugs, T-shirts, you name it. That's coming up next. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, Russian President Vladimir Putin has been busy rolling out the red carpet for strongman leaders of this week. Today was the turn of Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who is in Moscow to hash out a gas deal through Hungary's recent warning from the EU about the state of democracy in the country was also likely to have been on the card. So that's another topic they talked about. And yesterday, Turkey's President Erdogan touched down in the Black Sea resort of Sochi. And he and his Russian counterpart agreed to establish a demilitarized zone in Syria's last rebel stronghold in Idlib province. I'd like to put it to you, Darren. I mean, this is a recurring theme, is it? The further they get from Europe, Russia's there with open arms.
Yeah, and it's clear that Vladimir Putin's playing a clever game in terms of the politics of increasing that sphere to people who are feeling the cold shoulder from Europe, and not least Erdogan and Turkey, who, you know, clearly this sense of EU membership or integration has somewhat faltered, and Viktor Orban's increasing falling out with Brussels. So there is this sense, and I think a worrying sense, that some states are falling within Russia's orbit. That is not to say there are others, clearly, like Montenegro and Macedonia, who are falling within the orbit of the European Union.
Indeed. OK, now we have an update for you on a story that we did yesterday. We poked a little fun at the French president, Emmanuel Macron. He was trying to boost his waning popularity with some new presidential merchandise. Now, with sales point, that was a bit steep. Now, we were unsure if anyone would buy a mug like this one we were about to show you for 25 euros. There you go. Or this Macron-themed T-shirt for 50 euros. It turns out that Macron may have had the last laugh because 350,000 euros worth of memorabilia sold in just 3 days. What do you think of that, Jennifer?
I think that could pay for Brexit. You know, put that on the side of a bus. Just put Macron's face on the side of a bus and they'll make up the deficit.
It's very British, you know, to buy mugs of your rivals, you know. So.
Yeah.
Well, I said yesterday that you'd have to be a mug to buy a 25-euro mug.
Isn't it 25
What I'm going to say
euros?
today is, my word, there are quite a lot of mugs out there.
Absolutely. And now, instead of bringing you a raw moment, we're bringing you a fried moment. Belgium's trademark food, les frites, are about to get a whole lot smaller. Quentin, you wrote a story about that. What is this about?
It's about
French fries are getting smaller.
It's about the drought. So basically, Belgium has been facing right now is most severe drought in 45 years, something like that. And so basically, like, all the potatoes are smaller, so it means the fries are going to be smaller as well.
Anybody sad about that?
Yeah, the chips are down.
The chips are down.
Very good, very good. I'm actually very sad. I had some on Sunday. They're going to get smaller.
Exactly.
I'm not going to be a happy chap.
Exactly.
But this is pretty serious, though. I mean, the drought has affected, you know, the industry.
You know, but this is climate change in real life, like, because like with more and more droughts, even in Belgium, which is a very rainy country usually, like it means also like smaller fries.
Yeah, and if you look at the weather, even across much of Europe today, we're on seasonally high temperatures. And there is a serious point to this, despite smaller fries, is that food prices are going up, and they are, they are going to hit people in the pocket this autumn.
Exactly. Is this this is the kind of topic that will probably get people interested in climate change and issues like that?
I think it's going to be things like having to change our perception of what things cost in the supermarket, change the way we eat. I mean, we used to eat potatoes, maybe we should be eating more tomatoes grown in Belgium.
There you go, absolutely.
There's a pragmatic. There's a pragmatic.
Always a solution.
I want my chips rather than tomatoes.
Exactly.
Sorry. Not great with mayonnaise. Those aren't they?
And Darren, you're going to be in Salzburg. Just a preview of where you're going.
Tomorrow and Thursday. It's going to be a pretty big summit, as you say. Migration, security, two big issues, and clearly Brexit as well. Michel Barnier and Theresa May, they're going to brief on their both different sides of what they'd like. As we keep saying, time is ticking down to a deal. So there are always crucial moments. This will be another one.
We're looking forward to hearing all about that. So thank you for being on the programme tonight, and thank you for watching us here on Raw Politics. We'd like to hear your views, of course. Tell us what you're talking about. I'm on Tesa Arcilla on Twitter, and follow Euronews as well and use the hashtag Raw Politics. Have a good evening and bye for now.